Good morning. We're going to continue the series. This is week 3 out of 4. We're almost to the end, talking about what it means to live in a changed time. Not a time that might change someday or a time even that is changing, a time that has already changed dramatically in our lifetime. We've seen the world be different. In the last couple of weeks, the way we've structured these lessons is by, first of all, kind of giving you a value we want to talk about, one of our church values. We'll do that again today. We've talked about data that demonstrates change in the world, just kind of anecdotal data to represent, hey, the world is in fact changed, in case you weren't sure. We talked about global data in the first lesson. We talked about global Christian population in the second lesson. We'll have some more data today. And then at the end of the lesson, we go to Acts chapter 15 and look at a time when the church in its earliest years was facing dramatic change in who they were and their identity and what it meant, and trying to figure out how to live that out. That's the pattern today. And today we're going to look at our values again, and the one I want to focus on today is the idea of being forward-thinking. Last week, passion-driven, so you can guess. Today we want to talk about what does it mean to be forward-thinking when the times have already changed in front of us. How do we look at what is to come? And the topic I want to use kind of as information, just to demonstrate a changed world, is I want to talk about college data. Mark talked about this last week on behalf of the elders. He told us that our college ministry has changed over the years. He talked about how we want to have greater transparency with the church about what's happening in college ministry. And he told us that the college ministry team, our elders and our staff, are all prayerfully discerning the future of our college ministry. And what does all that say? In short, we're trying to be forward-thinking about a challenge that we face. What's the challenge? The fact that the world of college, of Christian education, and of college ministry has not only been changing, it is changed. The world has changed. Today, I want to give you some data. It's none of it all-inclusive. I put together like a 4-page report with charts and graphs, and then I said, you guys would enjoy sleeping through that. Not at all. So I honed it down to just a couple of anecdotal pieces of information to just reinforce if you want the 4-page report, I would love to give it to you. I'd love to read it to you in your living room. But setting that aside, here's the short version of how change has taken place in Christian colleges, for Churches of Christ, for Churches of Christ college ministry, colleges, and Christianity nationwide and around the globe. The world has changed. Let me give you some evidence of that. Christianity Today reports that between the years of 2020 and 2023, this isn't even this year's data, between 2020 and 2023, just that period of time, at least 18 Christian colleges have closed in the broader Christian world, not Church of Christ specific. We don't even have that many colleges. But in the broader Christian context, 18 Christian colleges have closed in just a 4-year period, and that number has gone up since then. When I was getting my PhD at Midwestern, I sat through a lecture through one of the administrators came to talk to us, and the title of the lecture was, "Please enroll in more classes." That wasn't the title, but that was the sense of it, because he says, it's a really tough time to be in Christian higher education. The world is changing. And that was 4 years ago, okay? Now, he was giving us that talk. Specific to Churches of Christ, we've had some closures. In graduate schools, the Churches of Christ have closed down 3 graduate schools since 2022. And that's a 2-year period. We've closed down 3 different graduate schools. Harding University is still open, of course. It's actually our largest college in Searcy, Arkansas. But they have closed their Memphis campus. The Harding Graduate School of Theology closed, and they had a big to-do about it this summer. They've moved some of their program to Searcy, and the rest of it's just going away forever. Austin Graduate School, where actually my friend Scott Elliott attended in Austin just a few years ago, was in such dire straits, they kind of handed their whole program over to Lipscomb University in Nashville. And it was kind of a Hail Mary. They said, please save us. Lipscomb operated the school for about 1.5 years, and then they closed this year. And then Oklahoma Christian Graduate School of Theology in Edmond, which is a big deal. It has some of the most important alumni in the history of Churches of Christ, none other than Benjamin Williams and Derek Tharp, are graduates of the Oklahoma Christian Graduate School of Theology, like recent graduates. I'm 2015. Were you 17 or something like that? Pretty recently, they closed this last year. That school that we very recently graduated from no longer exists. The graduate program, the college is still there, graduate program closed. Okay? It's a strange time to be alive if you're in Christian higher education. Okay? And now that's not specific to campus ministry, but if you might start to think, okay, something's going on at the college level, it impacts Christian enrollment, how would that impact campus ministries? Just last year, a journal put out by Abilene Christian University released the most recent data on campus ministries in Churches of Christ. The heyday for college ministry was in the mid-1980s. And we had the highest number of campus ministries we've ever had in that period. It has declined every year since. Today, the Churches of Christ around the country operate half as many campus ministries as we did in 1986. Okay? Not a quarter less, not a third, half as many. Okay? They've closed up and ceased to operate nationwide. And the trend is pretty stark and continuing. Enrollment in campus ministries that have continued is down dramatically as well. As part of my kind of fact-checking and gathering information, I said I want to talk to campus ministries around our area. I wasn't able to get really good, hard data from OU. I did get to visit the Haystack, which is the Baptist Student Union at OU. They actually had more data for me than our guys did. But same story in most of our large campus ministries. The one where I got interesting data was from OSU in Stillwater, because we have connections there. If you don't know, Elise Tharp, our own Elise Tharp, was the college minister at Stillwater before they came here. So it's pretty easy to get information of like, hey, how's it been going? And it's counterintuitive. Okay? What I mean by that is, on the one hand, OSU is having record enrollment this year. OSU as a university has more students enrolling as freshmen than they ever had, to the extent that they are now asking students to live off campus because they don't have enough dorms for them. But campus ministry at OSU is lower than it's ever been. It's about 40% of what it was just 15 years ago. Okay? Enrollment is up, student body is larger than it's ever been. Students in the Church of Christ campus ministry at the same location, lowest it's ever been. It's about 40% of what it was just 15 years ago. And I couldn't make this up. This was a bizarre incident that happened this week. I'm writing this slide, and we get a phone call at the church phone number here at the office. Unsolicited phone call. And it's someone associated with the Stillwater Church of Christ campus ministry. And he says, hey, we're really struggling, and so we're calling around churches that have campus ministries and asking what they're doing. To which we said, guess what we're doing? We were going to call you. Okay? That was a weird conversation. Okay? Everybody is going through it. It's not local. Something has changed in the landscape of college, of Christianity at college, and what's going on in that world. In that same study I mentioned from Abilene's journal, they gave some data about what does the average Church of Christ campus ministry look like. They said the typical campus ministry in Churches of Christ serves a campus with more than 15,000 students. Its church has an average attendance ranging from 120 to 299, so we can check that box. And its ministry is around 39 students. Okay? What I'm interested in there is the ratio. If you serve a university of about 15,000 students, the research shows you can expect about 39 students in a Church of Christ-based campus ministry. 39 to 15,000. Some of you are ahead of me. We don't serve a college with 15,000 students. There are not 15,000 students enrolled at ECU. There are not 10,000 students enrolled at ECU. At no time in the last 20 years have there even been 5,000 students enrolled at ECU. And their number is also in decline. In 2023, they reported to the state Board of Regents that their full-time equivalency enrollment was 2,500 students. And that's full-time equivalency enrollment. That doesn't mean there are 2,500 students living in a dorm. That means that's the enrollment. That includes adults who have careers and are going back to school, and an increasing number of students who are taking essentially all of their classes online, whether they live on campus or not. Okay? So do the math, the ratio. If 15,000 means 39, what does 2,500 mean? It means 6 or 7. And we have 2 Church of Christ campus ministries operating on that campus. Us and the church at Southwest in the same church tradition. Divide 6 or 7 by 2. The world has changed, okay? And the data tells us that we have to change our expectations of what is possible, of what can be done. It doesn't mean we have to change our commitment. It doesn't mean we have to change our passion for students to learn about the gospel. It doesn't mean that we care less about spreading the gospel. It doesn't mean we stop taking advantage of the opportunity that's ahead of us. But if you, in your mind, think of campus ministry as if it's the campus ministry that exists at a larger state college, that's not realistic. Or for a different type of church than us, that's not realistic. We have to think about what will it look like for a church like us in a town like this one at a college like that one. And we have to be realistic about our expectations and how we can look forward for the opportunities that actually exist. And I think there are a lot of them. How will we participate in the world that actually exists? What does it mean to be forward-thinking in a changed world where the data demands that we recognize the world is different? Okay? Last week we talked about Acts chapter 15, and we noticed 2 very important things. The first thing they did is they listened to the evidence. Paul and Barnabas came and told them, this is the way it is. Peter came and told them, this is what happened. And they listened to that. They accepted that things were happening. The world was changing. Gentiles were hearing the gospel. That was a fact outside of their control. And they were listening to that and accepting that and saying, what do we do now? The second thing they did was consult the scriptures. They said, does God give us any guidance in this situation? And then based on that, this week we're going to see James recommending to them a forward-thinking strategy for how to respond to that situation. This is Acts chapter 15, verse 19. James begins to speak. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God. There's a lot in that sentence when you really think about what James is suggesting. When he says not trouble, he's not talking about don't pester the Gentiles. He's talking about, are we going to mandate that the Gentiles who hear the gospel have to live under the law of Moses the way they had and their forefathers had for generations? The way the world had been, the only world they had ever known, existed a certain way. And the question was, are we going to insist that the Gentiles adapt to the world as we have known it, as it has been? And James says, no. He recognizes that the world has changed, and that some of the change is good. It's troubling to James. I guarantee you, if you could take James aside, like, okay, microphones are off, James. I assume there were microphones in Jerusalem, I don't know. Microphones are off, James. How do you feel about this? This is a man who is troubled. He is a devout, pious Jewish man who believes seriously in Jesus as the Messiah. But the world has changed and he's troubled by it. But he says, here's my judgment. This is what I can see based on what's going on. We can't become an obstacle to what God is doing among the Gentiles. So the first thing we could say is being forward-thinking means accepting the change that has already happened. James doesn't try to rewrite it. James doesn't try to ignore it. He doesn't say, can't be, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no. He doesn't close his ears and say, la, 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 la. He says, this is happening. God is doing something remarkable. Let's support that. Let's not trouble the Gentiles anymore. And then he makes a further recommendation, which itself is kind of fascinating and bold. He says, we need to write a letter to the Gentiles, to everybody, but should write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from what has been strangled, and from blood. Can I just tell you, that's a weird list. James says, we're going to write a letter to all the churches, and we're going to enact kind of a compromise of sorts that will say to the Gentiles, no, we're not going to expect you to be like us, but we're asking you to do 4 things to accommodate the sensibility of the Jewish Christians in these various places. 4 things. And the 4 things are an odd list. You go home this afternoon, read your New Testament, read it quickly because we don't have time. Read the whole thing, read the Old Testament, 39 books, and then write down what are the 4 most important things. Would it be these 4? I'm not sure it would. It's an odd list, which leads us to ask the question, why this list? The list actually comes from a very interesting place, and it's a reminder to us that James is a serious Bible student. James knew the Scriptures, and he had consulted the Scriptures looking for some guidance. And what James remembered is that even in the past, in the golden era, when things were the way he thought they were supposed to be, even in that time, they didn't expect all Gentiles to live as they lived. In fact, in the Old Testament, there are 2 chapters, Leviticus chapter 17 and chapter 18, which are addressed to the strangers who sojourn among them. Leviticus is a big, strange book, okay? Lots of things going on, lots of rules for all the Jewish people. But in the heart of the book, chapter 17 and 18, it says, for strangers that live among you, which would be who? When a Gentile lives in a Jewish community, here are the things you can expect them to do. And it gives 4 things. You want to guess what they are? Don't practice idolatry. Don't practice sexual immorality. Don't eat food that's been strangled. Don't partake in blood. 4 things. It says to protect the sensibilities of a Jewish community. The book of Leviticus doesn't say, tell the Gentiles who live among you to do everything that you do. It says, expect of them these 4 things. So what is James doing in this passage? He's not attempting to apply the entire book of Leviticus to the Gentiles. Okay? That would have been easy. He could have said, yeah, sure, they can be Christian as long as they do everything the book said. But that's not what he does. He recognizes that we've never asked the Gentiles to do everything Leviticus said. At most, we expected these 4 things from them. He says, so let's make that our compromise solution. We're not going to ask you to be circumcised. We never have. We're not going to ask for you to keep the Jewish festivals. We never have. We're going to ask, out of deference to the Jewish people you now participate in this family, this church with, to abstain from these 4 things that are listed in our book as the things we ask you to do. If you can do that, we'll make it work. And sure enough, if you read Acts 15, they send out a letter and verbatim quote those 4 things. In fact, if you read the letter, Luke repeats the letter verbatim. Luke changes the order, and he lists the 4 things in the order they occur in Leviticus and says, let's do that. What my point is, this isn't a sermon about Leviticus, believe it or not. It would be an interesting sermon if it was, but that's not the point. The point is, James did not try to turn back the clock. He didn't try to say, let's go back and let's make everybody do what Leviticus said. What he did was, he said, what can we learn from the past that applies to our current situation? Being forward-thinking means applying yesterday's wisdom to today's reality to create tomorrow's fruitfulness. He doesn't ignore the past. He says, what have we done in the past? This isn't the first time Jews and Gentiles have encountered each other. What did we do before? And he found something in Scripture that gave some general guidance. He said, yes, this is a very different situation. Yes, this is new. Yeah, this is unprecedented. Messiah has come and the world has changed. But we could take the general concept, we can take what we learned from the past, and we can say, how could that help us in this new situation to produce a situation where God can do what He wants in the future? We don't want to be the people who troubled the Gentiles. We don't want to be the people who made their life more difficult. Yesterday's wisdom, not yesterday's rules, not yesterday's expectations, not yesterday's facts, but yesterday's wisdom. What did we learn? Today's reality, tomorrow's fruit and opportunity. That's what James did. And then he ends his remarks with this sentence, which is maybe especially cryptic, but I think we can get to the sense of it. He ends in verse 21. For from ancient generations, Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he's read every Sabbath in the synagogues. What does he mean by that? Why does he end with that statement? First of all, it's not a command. It's just a statement of fact. The previous list was a command. Here's 4 things we're asking Gentiles to do. He's not saying, oh, and here's number 5, keep the Sabbath, and here's number 6, read Moses. Not doing that. He says, here are the 4 things that we expect Gentiles to do. And then he says, and here's something to keep in mind. From ancient generations, Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he has read every Sabbath in the synagogues. I don't think he's talking to Gentiles anymore with this part of it. I think he's speaking to his brethren. I think there were people who were very afraid. The world had changed. They had lived their lives trying to protect their identity as Jewish people. And now it felt like it was dying in front of their eyes. And they were afraid. They were losing their heritage. Change can be scary. And James is reminding them, you can't actually change the past. All those generations when Moses was preached among you, the things your forefathers did, they really happened. A Gentile believing the gospel today does not change what your forefathers did yesterday. Your heritage is what it is. Your heritage is safe. Judaism happened. In fact, he says it's still happening. When something changes, the day after Election Day, I remember when I was much more political as a younger man and was deeply concerned that the world would end if the wrong person won an election. And I remember the first time it really dawned on me, my guy didn't win the presidential election some years back. Keep this open-ended so you don't know where I'm going. My guy didn't win. And I remember thinking, this is it. Democracy has fallen. The end is here. And the next day I went to Walmart, and I remember standing in the Walmart parking lot thinking, there's no rioters. There's no barbarians overrunning the castle walls. It did matter. It did matter. Things did change. But I went to Walmart and I bought milk, and it was pretty much the same as it had been the day before the election. We get all worked up about this is going to change everything. And it might. James says, you know what's going to happen on Saturday? You Jewish folk are going to go down to the synagogue and you're going to read Moses just like you did last week. A Gentile believing the gospel in Galatia doesn't change the fact that you're going to go to the synagogue and read the scriptures on Sabbath. It doesn't change a thing. Your heritage is real. And what you do with it is real. Yes, the world has changed, but we don't have to be afraid of it. And the crazy thing is, we're still reading Moses today. Those people feared that if we let this happen, our way of life will end. Do you know what our call to reading was this morning? Did it on purpose. It was from Leviticus. 2,000 years later, there's a church full of Gentiles reading Moses on a Sunday morning. James says there's nothing to worry about. It's still going to be around. Being forwardness means gratefulness to the past without slavery to it. That the heritage we have is real, and we can be glad that it happened. James is not ashamed of who he is. He's not ashamed of his forefathers. He's not sad that they got it all wrong. He knows that they did the best they could do with what they had been given by God in their place and time. And now he was committed to do the same thing in his place and time. And he trusted that people who believed in God would do the best they could do with whatever came up tomorrow. He didn't feel like he had to tell everybody to do what he had done. He says, we'll read Moses on Saturday and it'll be okay. And he calms them down. I think there's a lot of value in that. If you're afraid that a changing world means the end of a way of life, I understand that fear. I feel it some days, I do. And then other days I remember this important theological fact. Walmart will still be open tomorrow. That less things change than I think. And that the heritage of the past lives on, often in ways I don't expect. My dad was a minister in the Churches of Christ. I'm a minister in the Churches of Christ. But we don't agree on a lot of things, as it turns out. And yet, the things he taught me live on in my life today. Maybe not the way he planned, but the way God planned. And I'm going to pass that heritage of values down to my two sons. And those values somehow will live on in them. Probably different than I imagine. But it lives on. Not because they're imitating the past, but because they're following God into the future. And that can be a beautiful thing. I want to end by simply saying this. I have no proposals today for college ministry. That actually wasn't the point of my sermon. Nothing to say about it. The world has changed. The world will change again. The world is changing. It is what it is. Here's what I know. The way you honor the past is by thriving in the future. The way I honor the heritage I have been given is by helping those values live on even when the world changes. The world is different than it has been. But we can take the heritage we have been handed, we can hand it off, and we can accept that some things will change, some things won't, and we won't even know which ones are which until it's all over. But the God who safeguarded the past will remain in control of the future, and our job is to participate in the good thing He's doing in all of time. Father, please take away the fear that we all have when we face change. From the time we're children to being adults to late in life, always we fear a disruption of something we've come to be safe in. Father, take away the fear and help us to see you and your hand in control of all times and places, of all people and nations. Help us to submit to your will. Help us to honor our heritage and the successes and victories of the past by seeing the opportunities you create for the future and bravely walking through them in faith that you remain in control. This we pray in the name of Jesus, your Son, who passed through a cross to rise up on the third day. Amen.